Everybody good?
Yep.
So what we have today is we got a couple of different situations going on, a couple of different scenes. But what I want to say is they're all linked, right? So I'm going to put out some information today. I'm going to give you as much as I can. When I leave here, I'm going to go to the hospital. I got some people I need to check on. All right. About 3:30 today, we had a shooting that ended up being a homicide up there just at the county line of Newport News. I have an adult black female that was struck by gunfire, and she is deceased. I had several witnesses on that lot that saw that take place. There's good footage there. The officers still have some things to do, and the detectives still have things to do, but as we got good information right away, and like I said up there, it appears it is going to be domestic related, and we were able to identify a vehicle and a suspect. We located, about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, we located that suspect vehicle here in this apartment complex, about 2 blocks from where I'm standing. We secured that perimeter, we circulated the area of that apartment complex and that vehicle. While doing that, an individual in a different location, if you will, at the rear of the perimeter, came out and started firing at officers. I have one officer that was struck. He had an individual with him that was also struck. They have both been transported to the hospital. Officers returned fire, and our suspect from the shooting that occurred here was also struck by gunfire. He has been transported to the hospital. So I have 3 individuals at the hospital. I have an officer, the individual that was riding along with him, and a suspect that came out and started the shooting first. That suspect that's at the hospital that fired at officers first is the same suspect that is wanted, the same suspect in the homicide that occurred approximately 2.5 hours ago. So we have the homicide that occurred. We were able to locate we were able to get a good description from witnesses there that came forward right away, multiple witnesses. We were able to get a good description of that vehicle, the license plate that was sent out to officers. That vehicle was found here in the apartment complex. We said it's about 2 blocks from where we are now. We set up a perimeter around that. In doing so, an individual came out of another apartment just shortly here over my right shoulder, started firing at officers. I had an officer that was struck, and an individual was with that officer that was struck. Officers returned fire, and that suspect was also struck, and all 3 have been transported to an area hospital. When I leave here, I'm going to go up and check on all 3 of those individuals. Preliminary, what I have is the officer is going to be okay. The individual that was with him is a little more serious, and the suspect I've got that is headed to surgery. So I need to go check on all 3 of those individuals. We have internal affairs here that will do the investigative side of the police shooting. We have our homicide team here that will process the scene. There is evidence here that is linked to the murder that just happened about 2.5, 3 hours ago. We have our critical incident stress management team that's going to talk to officers and dispatchers. There's a lot of tension. You know, things get elevated when this stuff is going on. We did put out a text message to all our officers. We will send it to the surrounding jurisdictions. We had an officer involved shooting, and the officer's okay, and give them a brief on what we have. I'm not releasing any names right now until I get up on checking everybody, and I owe that to everyone involved. We will eventually, but I need to go up and check on that everybody's okay. We're going to finish processing this scene. If you saw the drone here, we're going to take some aerial photos. Captain Hardy is going to notify Commonwealth Attorney Howard Gwynn to notify him of the situation. I will call him later this evening to brief him if anything has changed. But right now what we have is a homicide that occurred, a suspect was located, being in the area where that suspect in that vehicle was. The suspect came out and started firing at officers. Officers were struck. Officer was struck and another individual was struck. Officers returned fire, and the suspect from the homicide and did the shooting here first. Officer returning fire struck him, and he is at the hospital as we speak. All 3 are. And when I leave here, I'm going there to check on them. Does anybody have, I don't want to go much more than that, but I will tell you, does anybody have any questions? And we'll go from there. So again, the individual that ran out of an apartment and started firing at officers, we returned fire and struck that individual. That individual is at the hospital. That individual is the suspect in the homicide that happened about 2.5 hours earlier. So yes, it is the same individual.
Can you clarify if the individual that was struck with the officer is a civilian?
I don't want to go into that. I can tell you it was a civilian, but I don't want to go into any more than that because I owe it to them to go there and talk to that family and check on them. The last update I got that they were improving, that they were not considered critical, but I need to see that and hear that for myself, and that's where I'm headed when I leave here.
And you said when you got here there was gunfire came from the back of the complex. So was there technically a female
Not back of the complex, back of the perimeter. So the suspect, the apartment complex, the apartment that we were focusing on is about 2 blocks in this direction. The individual that came out firing at officers. So our perimeter was back this way and around the immediate. We had some officers out in case someone were to flee. We didn't want that vehicle to get out of this neighborhood. So you can see some of the vehicles that we had stationed, and then our suspect came out and started firing at officers. The same suspect is wanted in the homicide came out from an apartment over here, not from the apartment that we were watching, that we believed that that's where he was, and that's where his address came back to be.
Are the officers working on clearing more than one residence?
The residence is being cleared and has been cleared where the individual came out and started firing at officers. The original address where our suspect lives and resides, where the vehicle comes back to, we're going to search that residence for evidence, but there's no exigent circumstances now that we don't believe that there's anyone. We're not looking for anyone else in connection to this homicide, and we don't believe that there's any threat. This is going to be an evidence recovery. But before we leave this scene, we're here now. I want those aerial photos. We're going to need that for the court case and prosecution, and I want to make sure that we don't miss any evidence. I will tell you that we have recovered evidence already from this scene that is going to tie back into our homicide scene. And let me be clear, and I should have said this from the beginning. My heart goes out to the family who lost a loved one as a direct result of domestic violence situation. The young lady lost her life. So we're going to make the next of kin notification, and we're going to go check on everybody. Okay? All right.